Regular, regular.
Regular.
I heard something else. Okay. Congress over the summer when they were really sort of ramping up the discussion. What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up? Welcome everybody. Welcome back to the Stoop. This is Autoblack podcast. Thank y'all for joining us. If you don't know, Autoblack is a discussion-based podcast hosted by five Black architects where we get on this virtual stoop and we talk about whatever we want, from politics to culture to whatever. And as always, I'm up here. I got my friends with me. We have Perla. Got to unmute your mic, Perla.
Hi, my dog's barking and there's a siren. I didn't want to start the episode off like that. And you just said, "Are we ready?" I was ready.
I was ready. There's gonna be 4 Black architects because he just said, "What's up? What's up? What's up?" So I'm out. I'm done with this. Is my last recording.
I am sorry.
We're gonna do everything in order and decency. And
Yes.
we got with us Xavier.
So how you doing?
We got Whitney.
Hi.
And we got Jamar.
What's
And
good?
together we make up Autoblack. Family, how y'all doing?
Doing all right.
We got chickens on the call. We got sirens on the call. We starting this off with a bang. That's all I got.
No, my dog is a husky breed, so he likes to talk and howl at whatever crawls away. Like crawls. Okay, what? Okay, I'll just go on mute. But I'm here.
It's all good.
All is well.
We actually have 6 Black architects. We have Snow as well.
Man, it's a good day. It's a good day to I'm always happy to be on here with y'all. We have a very, very good episode in the books. It's actually a continuation of our previous recording that we did the other week when we were talking about Black spaces. And when we got offline and we were chopping it up after the recording, we realized that there's still a lot more that we can talk about and a lot more that we can discuss. And we actually started to get into some very interesting things. And so I would like us to just like pick right back up where we left off. And I think the way that we'll probably go about doing this is that, one, I think we should have an opportunity to also tell our stories a little bit, because we all grew up in very particular places, environmentally, geographically different, but yet there's still some cultural recognition that we all have experienced that underpins our perception of self. And so it'd be interesting for us to just kind of really dig into that. And first, first kind of thought that I have that I want to jump into is I actually want to target a question to Perla and X specifically, because one of the things that I've become envious about in sort of my later years is a lot of my Caribbean friends, a lot of my like one generation removed African immigrant friends. I've always been, it's a little bit of envy, because when they talk about their perception of themselves, like there is a very particular place in a very particular geographic location that they can pull on that helps to really solidify and cultivate their identity as well. Whereas with Black Americans or regular Blacks like myself, um, that's not as clear. And so Perla and X, by you both having your ancestral roots in the Caribbean, how has that helped solidify or help to construct your understanding of your Blackness, and then even how that works in terms of like your Blackness in America as well?
Do you want to go first, X?
Sure. My Blackness in America and Caribbean. I don't know. So a little bit of background. My family, because we were a part of the Commonwealth. So I'm from Trinidad. My family's from Trinidad, and because we were part of the Commonwealth, we were able to move. So by the time I was born, actually, a lot of my family was already in like England and Canada. So, and I was born in Canada. So it's a little bit different for me in terms of understanding how, I don't know. Am I glitching?
Well,
Are
so
you?
go-
Uh,
I just gotta say it. Since you were born in Canada, you not like us.
uh,
You not like us, all right? Dun, 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 dun.
hey, what?
that's why
I'm
Drake
done,
sells
Jamar.
more
That was
anyway.
good.
Dang.
Culture vulture.
But I guess so. What was the? What were some of the conversations that your parents had when you were young when they were sending you out into the world, right? So, for example, me and my parents, there's always the talk, about your blackness, what that means, how people see you, and that's sort of like the double consciousness that's in place of necessarily always sort of being recognizing like what that means in terms of how you enter a space. Like for example, like I was always like it was built in me that I don't leave out that store without the item that I purchased in a bag, receipt in hand. I don't enter into a store if I'm hanging out with my friends and I got a backpack on because of the perception of my blackness entering into that space. And it's like I feel like, there's these cultural survival techniques that, you know, me that I for sure had to sort of learn and undertake as being like a black American. And like how was that the same for you? Was it the same but different?
I would say in certain places, so like in Trinidad, it is very much a multicultural civilized let's go civilization country because we do have, so a third of the population is Indians from India, and then we have a third population that's black, and then there's a percentage of the population that's like Syrian and German and English, well, white English. So we do have a multicultural civilization. Dang, civilization population again. Um, but I think it depends on the spaces that you're in, because if you're, it's sort of like New York, where it's not really a melting pot. It's more like a tossed salad kind of thing, where you could be in a whole neighborhood of just black people, and if a third of the population is black people, you could like maybe go a long time without seeing somebody else, because people are really separated. Well, some places people are really separated depending on the communities you grew up in. So I guess if you do interact with somebody outside of your community, then that would happen, because there have been sort of incidents in the past of the country, like way back in the past, because historically Indians were brought in to start working in Trinidad. I think, don't don't quote me, but like in the 70s or something like that, and it kind of changed the population and changed they opened the population up to immigrants coming in, and it really changed the population. And we also have Venezuela right there, so Spanish are also coming in with
Mm.
the changing in their government and the money over there. It was a big, well, probably still is a big problem with immigration. So I would say yes and
So
no. Like like we can find times where people are worried about sort of those interactions, and there are times that we're not really.
Um, if from my family's from Haiti
IUT.
and IET. Sorry, thank you, Rob. IET, and so I mean, I guess to answer your question in summary, 1804 is ingrained in us. Our history, the story of us being the first liberated Black country, um, like even down to the native people who were on the island prior to the colonization of the French. So we have the Taino indigenous people, where we that were well, we were taught that growing up that even before the French brought the people from Africa into the island of Hispaniola, which includes DR and Haiti. For those who don't know, I'm pausing for effect. Anyway, yeah. So, like, we're very knowledgeable on how we got here, the good and the bad. And so, when when we transfer over to how I live my life in Black spaces or just living in this country, just as a backstory, my dad is the one who came here first to kind of settle in, and then brought my mom afterwards. So my dad was adamant about my sister and I being raised where we weren't associated with the stereotypes that Haitian had around that time. Um, I don't want to get too much into it because it does still it's still a sore spot. But in the '90s, Haitians had a reputation, and so late '80s, early '90s, and so you guys can Google. There were protests and marches, particularly in New York, to kind of speak out against those stereotypes that were very detrimental to the Haitian community. And so my dad wanted to protect my sister and I from the teasing or the mockery that the country may have in regards to Haitian people. So when I speak to my family who's in Haiti and or even my family in Canada, because my mom's family migrated to Canada, my dad's family stayed in Haiti, and so
Was it?
they no, but no, the same way Jamar teased you about being born in Canada, my Canadian family teases us for being born in the US. So, um,
I mean, it makes sense right now.
um, but yeah, my knowledge in Haitian Creole isn't as great as it should be because of that, and that was really in regards to my dad trying to protect us, or I guess provide a space for us to not grow up being part of some sort of stigma. But my mom really drilled into us the importance of us understanding our history. And bless her heart, even today she's trying to teach us Creole, but we're just like, Mom, come on. I mean, we understand it, but to speak it, we sound very Caucasian to the point that there's no point of speaking it. Um, and I guess, just to wrap this up or cap it up, we were really surrounded by Caribbean culture. So when my family migrated to the U.S. in Massachusetts, as we spoke about in previous episodes, like there's a heavy Caribbean community in Boston, and so for the majority of my adolescence, I've been surrounded by different Caribbean cultures. And it wasn't until after I went to like middle school is when I started to really see white people and other races that didn't look like what I was used to. And just to be clear, when I say Caribbean, I'm not speaking just Black. I'm speaking like the people who have the Indian tone. I'm talking about people who look Latino. Like that's what I mean by Caribbean. I'm not speaking just by Black Caribbeans. So I'm my upbringing. I'm used to seeing diversity in the Caribbean culture. And then when I transitioned to like middle school and onwards, I started to be a bit more acclimated with other races that our communities and societies
So is it
entail of.
fair to say that in Caribbean culture, your construction of your identity has in culture has more to do with place than it does with what you look like?
Um, yes and no, because colorism still exists. Like there's still um, there is still a prejudice when it comes to how you look. I don't know what it is right now in the country, but from what I've been told and even seen myself, um, in Haiti, the very affluent people are a bit of a lighter hue. And the people who are a bit more dark skinned, they're more of the middle class or even lower class. Not to say that there aren't dark skinned upper class people, but typically they are of light.
So one other question is when you were talking about your mom in particular, making sure that you have an understanding of your Haitian roots, your Haitian culture. Um, Growing up in Boston, what did those spaces look like for you to have that cultural exchange and dialogue in the house, or
Mm.
really more outside of the house? like
Yeah.
like we talk about, for example, like the barbershop in my upbringing was an important space for that cultural exchange of, you know, people across different socioeconomic groups who are, you know, coming back to the place in which they grew up in, but you know they've gone and become dispersed. So like that was a very particular space, had a very particular aesthetic, had a very particular type of music playing in the background. Conversation was very intentional around certain subjects. So like that's how the spaces were like crafted to have that cultural exchange.
Yeah.
And so how, what did that look like for you?
So it's interesting because the majority of those spaces, well, actually, there's only one space that I really was an incubus of that culture, was my church. And so my church was the place where people who migrated to the states would come and network and connect with people who speak their own language, who maybe even were their neighbors back on the island, or who knew someone that got them in touch with a potential job, a place to live, all this other stuff. So, and my church was heavily involved in the community itself. So, every year there is a Haitian parade that happens on the strip of Blue Hill. And my church would be heavily involved in that. We would be the first group that would lead that parade. And so, um, yeah, I think my my church would be that place. I guess if I'm equating it to your barbershop or the salon. Yeah, so it was both a place to get spiritual growth, although you know what, let me get, I don't want to go down, but yeah, yeah, it was a place for spiritual growth, but also a place where connection and community can happen both within the building but also on the streets.
Mm. So now, if we kind of roll over to, you know, us blackity black, you know, and blackity black portion of the group. Uh,
Damn,
Not like
that's
that.
crazy.
I ain't gonna lie. When we came out and said like, oh, you know, we regular black and we got, I was like, y'all, we got extra large black and extra small black. Like, what kind of color
That's
black you
nuts.
got?
well, so the reason why I say that is because I remember, you know, I grew up in the DMV area, more specifically Northern Virginia, and so it was very diverse. Like I had a lot of friends that were from, you know, Ethiopia, from the Latin American countries, and so like I had a very diverse high school, and so a lot of my friends were Ethiopian. I remember when Jamar and I had first met, we were in at UVA, and he had told me, "Man, I just saw this person. They're black, but they not like black, and like they just look different." And like when he showed who he was talking about, it was an Ethiopian person. And I was like, "You've never seen somebody from Ethiopia?" He's like, "No, man, but they look black, but like they not like my black." So that
It was so, I think it was the forehead. I think it was the forehead. That's what threw me off.
Mercy
Like I was like,
me.
I ain't never seen a forehead that
You're about to be
size.
dragged. And I love that. I love that.
So I actually have a question for you, Whitney. Growing up in South Carolina, you know, I grew up in the North. Spent a lot of my time in the northeastern cities like Philly, and so whenever, and obviously my family had its roots from the South, Red Springs, North Carolina. My grandfather's from Mississippi. On my groom side of the families, you know, originated out of Georgia. So you know there is a southern connection that obviously I have, and I every time when we would go south, there was a different type of thing to be mindful about, and like one thing in particular is, you know, when I would see the Confederate flag, for example, like that was a huge kind of not necessarily a fearful thing, but it was so different because I didn't see that growing up often. And I talk. My wife is from Southern Virginia, and so when she sees the Confederate flag, she understands its history. She understands what it means, but the it's also common for her. So like, there's a different reaction that she has that's not as visceral as I have because of how I grew up. And just with you growing up in South Carolina, I'm sure you've had some of the similar, um, you know, shared spaces with people who brandished the flag or wore it as clothing. And how did that work in like your construction of your self and identity and all of that?
So my parents are really good about teaching us our history and just helping us understand, I think, the perception of what others have of Black people, especially in the South. Um, but I guess as a little background, my father is older, so he could be like my grandfather. He's like in his 70s, I believe. So always had, I think, like a closer connection to the older South than other people my age because my grandparents, like when I was little, they were already in their 80s. And so all of like my grandparents and like my cousins per se were all like older adults. And so on my dad's side, at some point, I think it was my grandfather or around that kind of age range, they migrated to New York, but they ended up coming back. And so I have some cousins that were in the Northeast region and some that came back to South Carolina. Um, my grandfather is very like more white presenting, so him and his brother were able to enlist into World War II as white men because they knew they would have better treatment that way. But my grandmother was very like brown, and so they kind of had to, I think, like because my dad ended up coming out more brown versus his other siblings. Like my dad is a baby boomer, so he was born in December, and his brother, the next sibling, was born not January right after, but the January following. And so his brother is lighter with lighter eyes, and so are most of the rest of his siblings that came after him. So I feel like because of my dad's skin being more brown, he always had to understand and kind of figure out his place a little bit differently than his siblings. So that kind of was taught to my sister and myself as well. But then my mom, who is more of a fair skin, but also came from a very poor economic background, she also understood her place. It's not only that she was poor, it's also that she was raised by a single mother who had kids from different fathers. So that kind of perception, not only from white people, but from the Black community as well, is how she was brought up in the world. And so the things that she experienced is also things that were taught to my sister and I. So that being said, they're always aware of their place in the world. They're always aware of their history. And so activism was a really big part of me growing up. We always would go and march and protest of the Confederate flag at the state capitol. That was like a yearly thing. I do remember doing that as a kid. My parents were very active in the community and at church. I remember, I think we still have them, like these Black history cards to teach you about like political and like important Black figures in our history. Um, and so when it comes to like the Confederate flag, I feel like I'm always aware of it. Like I always see it, and it helps me like depending on like where it's at and what it like what I think, I don't know the word for it, like how it's presented, like whether it's a sticker or a flag, it kind of tells me a little bit about the person and like, how far they're willing to go for what they believe in. It showed up a lot in our schooling, to the point where I had a American history AP teacher who used to go do like the American Civil War reenactments and was like really into that whole thing. Like he had the glasses from that period and all of that. He like would argue us down saying like the Civil War happened wasn't because of slavery. Like that wasn't the reason. It would be like conversations about the Confederate flag as well. Um, I think because of how I was raised and in that activism, uh, I would kind of push back in little ways. So, like at my high school, when all the kids are, of age to drive to school, we had a big parking lot. There was this one row that was called Redneck Row because there would be a bunch of big pickup trucks and they would have Confederate flag stickers and sometimes like a flag. And so I would just park my little 1996 Nissan Sentra right in the middle of it. Me and my sister would get out. We'd show up like banging Lil Wayne and any other black artists that we were listening to at the time, and just that was like our little form of protest, I think, without kind of recognizing it at the time. But I think the biggest thing we learned, and the thing that I think my parents repeated a lot, is that they can't take away what you know. So education is like the biggest thing that they pushed, because there were, I guess it's hard. It's so hard for me to describe because there's so many nuances. My town was mostly growing up, mostly white and black people. That was it. There are like Mexicans and other Hispanic people who are around, but they were more in like other towns who were a little bit more rural and had like the peach trees and like the things in the crops that they were working in. Now it's a little bit more diverse. Like I think there's like a couple of Indian families there now, but before it was really only white and black people. But the white people are split into those who have more money and those who don't. And I put quotes around more money because that's relative to the rural South. Again, it's not like, white people with money here in Boston. Like, it's not giving that. But if that's like your entire world, then it gives like, oh, they have all the money in the world. And so I think growing up with those nuances, especially being one of like 5 black kids in the quote unquote like smart class, you see those issues, you hear those conversations, you always know that if you do have a white friend, it's got a time limit on it because of them taking on the beliefs of their parents, essentially. Like we all grew up together, K through 12, same people, just about best friends. We had these conversations. We know more about each other and each other's hair, each other's cultures than I think like other people around in the United States would, because we're always together. But then as soon as you graduate, they start believing differently and voting differently. And there's always like
interesting.
I'm losing my words. There's always a condition for them. So, like, for instance, as a black girl, I know there were white boys that were like, thought I was cute, wanted to hang out with me, talk to me more, but their parents wouldn't approve of that. So it's like those kind of conditions that are always set that you just inherently understand.
So if you think about back then and having to deal with all of the processing that it took to understand your place and understand your role within that space, what can you recall as like some of the sanctuary spaces or some of your protected spaces where you're able to feel free to just express your blackness in its fullness and authenticity? Like what are like some of the particular constructions types of that space?
I think as a black person in the South, especially the rural South, there are no spaces where you feel that free, because there's always the potential of a white person being around. So the freest that I would feel, I can't really say church. I feel like that would be like a great choice, but because of like being a woman, it wasn't as freeing as like just being outside in the woods with like my sister and my cousins. Like that, I would say, would feel free to a certain extent, but again, it's the rural South, so people do hunt. So it's not like you're feeling that free. Anyone could show up at any point.
When you say hunt,
Like
are you
deer,
talking?
like with shotguns.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
not us. No.
Oh, okay.
Not us.
Like, oh my god!
No. Animal. Deer.
Run.
Like deer, squirrels, rabbits. Like
Got
that.
it,
Yeah.
Okay.
See the white heads come up.
I would say when I was younger, because you don't understand as much, definitely like being outside, like in the woods, just like kind of playing was probably the freest. But I'm always a huge fan of being out in nature and like having that time spent. That changed when my parents got divorced. My mom moved more into town, so we lived in the suburbs. So you don't really have that freedom because of like the homeowners association. There's like not really any trees. It's just kind of like grass. It's flat. So
So
yeah,
then you have to find new spaces.
yeah, and it's not a lot of there. There aren't places to really hang out in the rural South other than someone's home, someone's church, or their like backyard. Um, so we're very limited in that. So like school would be that place where like you would hang out with friends and like see them and have that fun, but you're there with white people and like in the system and all of that. So
And Jamar, with you growing up in 757 Hampton, Virginia, um, I mean, I don't think that there is one region in the United States that has so many, like the depth of like just real raw talent and like culture moving. Like you think of
Oh
Pharrell
God,
Williams, you think of Missy Elliott, you think of like uh,
Chris Brown.
Chris Brown.
Where they
Well,
at now?
not
Whoa,
really, not really,
whoa. He's
yeah,
from the
not really Chris
804s.
Brown. But like if you
Steve
just think of
Travis.
Timberland, like the, and then you go to the athletes. I mean, Michael Vick.
We talking about the
I
'90s.
mean, not even now. Like you know,
Justin
yeah,
Gatlin.
and like so you come from a particular place that is like very black, but also I feel like it's the talent of that black of those black people that are that's revered, and even revered like nationally. I mean, big recruiting district for football, all of that, right? But then you more academic, and I know that you had tension and like
Well, damn. The talent that left the city. You
You got all this talent, but you
you
just
came
want
up
to
with
say
the
you
no
don't.
brains.
shade.
No
Hey,
wrong.
no shade, man. Because when we would do pickup at UVA, man, if I swung into you in the corner, I know that was cash. Like you literally shot the lights out. I don't know if you remember that, but like no shade.
How you gonna look up and be like all this athletic talent? You
Academic, you can
you
read.
came out and you were an A+ student.
What
You didn't
happened?
contribute necessarily to culture, but you
But what I was trying to get at is that with you being more like academic focused and like you really leaning into like I want to be an architect, I want to go to school, I want to go to UVA, and like I know that you had some tension in that, and like even with your feeling like at some level some people in your school, your teachers, your counselors not like failing you, and like you having to really push your own way academically, because if you wasn't on the sports team, or if you wasn't a star athlete, then you didn't really get the focus. And so how did that work for or against you in understanding like yourself, your black self within this very black region who is recognized for their talent, but then when you're somebody who's more academic focused, you kind of are not an afterthought.
so one, I gotta rewind 20 minutes back because the whole, first of all, Ethiopian people are beautiful. All right. That's why I was blown away. That's why I could tell Rob, I'm like, yo, this person black. They ain't black, but like, dear God.
You already got canceled.
So
It's
that's
fine,
gonna
man.
clarify that, right? Yo, I was so blown away by her, and I hope she listens to this one day because I'm still crushing. But actually, she's actually in Boston. That's what pissed me off. I realized she's in Boston now. I'm like, hold on, we could have been soulmates. But anyway, to to go back to what you were saying about the magnificent 757, I will say I'll push back. Like, it wasn't necessarily like about like the focus on sports, and like I didn't feel um necessarily like cared for or like an afterthought. It was more so that first of all, just backtracking, I didn't realize how many people don't have black teachers,
Mm.
like or have very few black
never
teachers.
had one.
And I, throughout my career, have always had black teachers at every level of elementary school, even preschool, elementary school, middle school, high school. I've always seen black representation. And it's not been just one, it's been 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12. Like, it's been crazy how much black representation has happened. That's why when I went to UVA, that was a culture shock because I have always been surrounded by blackness. We have at least two HBCUs in the 757. So and they're very proud HBCUs. They're not small HBCUs. They're very proud. They're very big on sports. They're very big on the band. Like how the HBCU is. But they're also really big on academics. Hampton University is one of the premier HBCUs in the country. So I'm very proud to come from that. But in terms of my education, I always felt looked after. It was actually my guidance counselor who she pushed me to obviously go to college. But once I told her I was going to UVA, she was like, "Oh, well, maybe you can go to community college and save some money and stuff." I'm like, "I ain't poor." I mean, we weren't rich, but we also weren't poor. And also I'm not trying stigmatize community college, but I knew that community college wasn't the route to go to get into architecture, at least for me, because I just know it's another hurdle that you have to cross to get the credits transferred over, and it's just not a smooth process. But I've always had the support, that's for sure. And I actually have had a lot of white teachers that actually helped support me. One was my language, my 12th grade language arts teacher, English teacher. She really helped me craft my essay to apply to UVA, and she still supports me to this day. We're still friends on Facebook, and I will always forever be thankful for her. Also, my math teacher, she was actually a white woman. She's passed away now, but she actually was at the school when it was segregated. So she was an older woman, but she had seen that process and she took me under her wing as well, and helped me kind of craft my college essay. And I failed out her class. I'm not gonna lie to you. She was the only math teacher that pushed not using a calculator. I'm like, yo,
That's
I know
crazy.
this ain't 1940. I know you was alive back then, using abacuses and everything. But yeah, like we have calculators now. But I couldn't keep up with her her pre-algebra. No, it wasn't pre-algebra. It was pre-calculus class. I couldn't keep
You
up
did
with that.
pre-calc with no calculator?
Smart.
That's
Yeah, she
nuts.
was pushing pre-calc with no calculator,
Wow.
and like half the class dropped out. Yeah, literally half the class dropped out. I'm surprised anybody stayed in the class, but she was a wonderful
Yeah.
woman. And you know what? I even took it to UVA because even at UVA, I found the black space at UVA. Even though UVA is a PWI, that community helped push me through
Mm-hmm.
that time. But you know who pushed me through architecture school? Who helped push me through?
Me?
It was Susan Moma. Nah, no, no, no. You would shut the door on me late at night when I was trying to have a conversation with you about architecture, and you'd be like, "Nah, you gotta go." But Susan Moma, the professor there, she actually was the person I leaned on a lot, and she actually got me my first internship. And like I said, she's a white professor, and so it's interesting how like a lot of, even though I've been surrounded by blackness, there's been a lot of the white people are white adults in my life that's kind of helped push through. But obviously, there's been a lot of black support as well throughout that journey as well.
That point that
So
you made on having black teachers, I didn't that I think that's something that's real, and I didn't necessarily understood that. So when I was growing up, I spent half of my adolescence in Prince George's County, and back then in the '90s, Prince George's County was one of the most, and still is one of the most affluent black communities in the country. And in particular, in the '90s, late '80s and '90s, it really exploded because of DC Mayor Marion Barry, and like Marion Barry was huge in creating like his one of his economic platforms was to create a larger black upper middle class community, and he did that by through DC contracts and getting black folks into the DC government to work and creating like a real stable economic base. And that's what really helped to propel like PG County to being like a real like place of like black excellence, black middle class, black upper middle class. So growing up in that perspective, like I I've always seen black people that are from a range of you know strong middle class family to upper middle class to having living into like gated communities and driving Lexuses and BMWs, having really high profile jobs. And so there's a sense of like of I guess of normalcy that was for me. And then fast forward, I moved to Virginia, Northern Virginia, and that isn't necessarily the same. And then so it was something that was almost like a culture shock for me. And then go to UVA, and that is, that's almost like being in a pressure cooker where you're the community that you can lean on becomes a little bit smaller. And for us in particular, X and Jamar, we went to a very particular school of, Thomas Jefferson's University. And so you know how we had to really um, we learned a lot about Thomas Jefferson, his architectural like it was just like force fed to you, right? How did y'all reconcile your identity and having to actually walk around the spaces that like our ancestors built? And like for context, UVA was one of the only Thomas Jefferson had a wasn't a very well regarded guy towards the later half of his life. He was struggling a lot financially, and the only thing that allowed him to continue to having some sort of success was the fact that he relied on enslaved labor for his own grounds, and like even in order to get UVA built. And UVA was one of the only schools during that time that, as if you were enrolled as a student, you got your own slave labor, like your own personal slave. And so like blackness is very present in terms of like the hands that built the school. So how did y'all like reconcile your identity of being in that space, especially as you started to learn about the significant presence of like black people being the ones who really built UVA from the ground up?
If I may start first at the regular black here, um, but honestly, I walked through it with a sense of pride. You know, like I don't think going into UV I knew how much slave labor actually created the the grounds that we walk on, especially because it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So it's a very protected space. It's a very regarded space and revered space. Everybody talks about the lawn. Like it's been replicated in almost every university across the U.S. But I kind of walked in through in the doors, especially once I took a class by Frank Dukes. It was called Writing Unwritable Wrongs, and we talked a lot about the slave labor that went to building the university. We talked about a lot of things, but we spoke specifically about obviously the law at UVA. And with that, I was like, I belong here. Like again, I know affirmative action was a thing back then. It's no longer a thing now. But a lot of people would say like, "Oh, you just got there because of." They're like, "Oh, you play sports." I'm like, "No, I'm just an academic, clearly." But a lot of people did ask. They said, "Oh, your son goes to UVA, so he must play sports." Like, no, he's there on academics, and I took that with pride because I'm like, maybe not my ancestors, but like obviously our ancestors built this place, and now that I'm not taking care of the grounds, I'm actually here getting the education. There was a lot of pride there.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit different because UVA doesn't really talk about that history. I think not until really we left. Like they had the whole memorial built on the side of the lawn. It's so
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I haven't actually been to it actually. Now that I think about it, but it's all kind of in the cut next to where college students get drunk over there. Um, so actually haven't really thought about what that meant. I just was at UV. I knew the purpose. I know, that time that you was in the argument with that certain person on the basketball court, and I was supposed to jump in. I was
I'm
like,
just here to get a degree.
I'm here for a purpose. I'm just gonna, get this degree and leave. I didn't really think about it as much, especially back then, because yeah, there's just too much
What
going on with architecture.
What about some of the traditions that UVA is very known to continue, right? So I think of, for example, it's a tradition to go to the football games dressed up,
Mm.
like suit, tie, all of that, because there's the the tradition of like you getting dressed up to go to the football games, and then even like Foxfield, right, where the horse racing events that people go get dressed up, and like to me, I never participated in any of those things because I found it was strange to me, because if you think about like the very particular time period that they were asking us to relive because of tradition, I think about, and I was very mindful of this, like black people were around at this very particular time period that they're trying to get us to recall. Um, but that wasn't a great time for us to be around, and like I just found it strange. And I didn't knock any other black person that participated in these things, but I just always found it strange to get dressed up to go back to a time period that wasn't great for us. And frankly, they didn't want us there in those spaces during the time period that they're trying to recall us for the sake of tradition. I just always found that strange. And like, for example, when we would go to football games, I intentionally would wear all black to the football games because it kind of like you, Whitney, that was my sense of defiance of I recognize your tradition. This is my first year, Jamar. I see you making the smirk.
Cause like I'm like I got
I,
photos of you
I,
wearing orange. You were
I ain't
proud
know
as
you back
hell.
then. I ain't know you back.
Hey, look, don't even put
I ain't
Facebook.
know you back then. I ain't have a real strong
Yes, you
black community
did.
back then. The first
We was
year.
all in the same classes.
Nah, I ain't mess with none of y'all first year. I was a student athlete actually, so I ain't mess with none of y'all.
Oh,
Hey, see, look, I was
I'm
there for academics. You were the stereotype.
But no, but in all seriousness, no, there was a lot of football games that I remember. I would always wear all black, and it was a conscious decision, and and it's because of me trying to like, how can I participate in this when they're recalling on a very particular time period that people that look like me weren't meant to be a part of.
Hmm. Well, Rob, so when you dressed up, okay, two questions. When you or protested in a way where you did not want to dress up and go to these football games, and when you actually did, you dressed up in all black. Was that in your way also, I guess, honoring the black people who weren't able to participate in these events at a particular time? And my second question is, do you know what the black people at the time of when these events were being held at UVA were doing? Like, were they essentially the help?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, is that? Oh,
I mean,
okay.
I guess
Okay.
it depends on like what time period that you're trying to reference, whether it's
Well,
back during.
what time period was the most offensive to you, or the most uncomfortable for you to like kind of have an internal
I mean, I don't
struggle?
I don't think I necessarily reference a particular time period, but I just think of like the history of Black people in the spaces of UVA, starting from enslaved labor to being denied access and right to go to the school, and then also just the segregation. And I mean, this
Okay.
you know
Sorry, this is me learning. So,
yeah.
black people at UVA were allowed to help and build the campus, but they weren't allowed to actually learn at the
Yeah,
campus.
Was
and
not they
not
allowed to help? They were told to
forced.
help.
Oh, my apologies. They were told to help.
But
Got
to your earlier question, me wearing all black at that time and my intentionalness behind it had nothing to do with uh, recognizing other black people, in a sense where it was more
it.
so just
Interesting.
me
Okay.
reaffirming my own sense and confidence of self, and like it had more so to be about me constructing my identity in those spaces and being intentional with how I did it,
Hmm.
less to do with honoring those before me, if
So
that
it's
makes
self
sense.
preservation, essentially.
More so self reassurance.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say.
You
Oh, go
good?
ahead, X. Oh, I'll just say that like so I actually for the first game of my first year at UVA, my roommate was a traditional UVA student. He wore the blazer. He was on the Jefferson Society, which is the debating society, because UVA is really big on debating and all that stuff. But he was a true like legacy kid. I'm pretty sure his parents went there, but that man bled orange and blue and tradition. He wore the khakis. Like if you look up like a UVA student, he was literally that traditional person. The pink shirt,
You said he
everything.
was white?
Anyway, he was
Oh.
white. He was white.
Sperry's.
And
Mm-hmm.
Sperry's, the LL
Oh,
Bean
wow.
book bag, the Mac laptop, the string attached to the glasses, so when you take it off, it hangs down. He was that type of person. But he so I tried to I'm being interrupted.
Rob, you might as well just say hi.
Look here, little Rob. Look.
Great timing.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. Your son had
Thank
more
you.
important
I
things
was
to
getting to a
say.
good point too. I was getting to a deep point. But no. So the first game of the first year, he dressed up, and because like again, I heard about this tradition. I'm like, I'm gonna dress up too. So I started pulling out my Sunday best. That's all I know, right? I had a pinstripe suit because that was cool back then. And so he put on his little blazer, like a blue blazer, it's a navy blazer and khaki pants, right? That's traditionally what they wear. And so I pull up like like my little black and brown tie, have my tan pinstripe suit. And I'm like, well, it's September. It's like 85 degrees outside. And I start seeing what everybody else is wearing. I'm like, I think I'm overdressed. So I'm just going to put this UVA shirt on and call it a day. And after that, I never attempted
Yo,
again because it
did
just
you
wasn't
try
my
to go to the
style. I
football game?
realized that was more of
You tried to go to the
no,
football
I'm sorry.
game in your Stacey Adams bottoms?
Yeah.
I really did though. I really did. I literally had everything on, and I saw like all my other like hallmates who were also. I was the only black dude on the hall on my side of the hall. Peter was on the other side of the hall with his friend, his roommate Carlton. But on my side of the hall, I was the only black dude, so I didn't know anybody. I was just following the lead, and I was like, this ain't for me. So
Yeah.
I'm just go ahead and put this orange shirt on, and that was my form of protest.
One interesting thing about being at UVA was I don't know. It seems like we sort of had like the same experience. So like I also didn't. So I came down from New York, so it was a predominantly black community. Seems like Rob also came from a predominantly black community, and Jamal came from a predominantly black community. I had a lot of black teachers as well. So that first year at UVA, you're kind of just feeling out everything and like looking for that black space that we're kind of talking about. Like um, first year, I was lucky. I had two other black people on my hall. I also had like Spanish people and Chinese, and like it was like almost a really nice split between like diverse halls. So it was like I didn't really have that thing where I felt out of place because it was a lot of diversity on my hall itself, and we would talk to each other and stuff like that. So it was just in college that first year, just feeling out, finding your space, and then I think like a lot of black people did sort of not really dress up. It was maybe like 70-30. Like black people would dress up for the real preppy Sperry's, khaki pants, collared shirt. But there were a good percentage of black people who really just put on a t-shirt and just come down and go to the game. So I mean, it, I had a similar experience to what y'all was saying. Like it wasn't you had to start to search for that first year, and then second year, third year, it was pretty much you knew where the spaces were. You had the barber shop, you had house parties or whatever. Like you found your community at UVA. I don't know if it was like that for Pearl and Whitney, but
Oh, I am an honorary UVA alumni. So really, my experience at UVA is really with Rob, X, and Jamar during our trips. But my actual alumni, my actual college I went to was a very rural school up in Michigan. And one thing that I'm hearing from you guys' story is that, which is different from mine, is that for some reason, I'm always placed in highly diverse places. So in high school, when we transitioned from a heavy Caribbean community to a more diverse, and yes, it was the first time I got like exposed to like white people and stuff like that. I had my own culture shock, which in turn really reflects my personality now. But I was still at a school with 3,000 students, but it had like a mixture of people from different backgrounds. And even in my college, it was still heavy on diversity. And so, what's interesting in college, though, which I haven't experienced, is that my college was a religious college. And when we did go to church, there were different churches on campus. There was one that was heavily white. There was one that was heavily black. There was one that was mixed. There was one that was Haitian. There was one that was African. That was one that
You
was all
preach.
nations. Okay. And so I think in college, I was starting to see like, wait a minute, the issues that I've been taught about segregation or just like racism or some sort of prejudice is a little bit, and not even a little bit, it's in the church, it's in religious affiliations as well. And so that's when my eyes started to open up just a little bit more. Like, it is a delayed realization, I will admit, because I was just always in diverse places, hearing different opinions. I'm just used to that. So when that happened on that campus, it was the start of me. It was the start of my enlightenment. I'll just say that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Was the segregation of churches due to like language differences
So,
or cultural differences? Like, how we find safe spaces within our culture. Was that a reason why, or was
well,
it,
I think it's both. I think it's everything you just said. But my issue is, why is it only one Saturday in the year where all of the different churches are allowed to go into the primary church, which is heavily on whites? Or I'm not gonna say the name of the I mean, Google. But anyways,
I bet
like,
that was the
it's just,
driest service too.
listen. And what spoke loudly was that people intentionally did not go to the main church because of the service that we were having. So if it was I'm just gonna basically say it. If it was Black Sabbath or Black History Sabbath at the church, there are some people who would typically go to that main church
Mm,
would not attend because it's just
Hmm.
not their style,
Hmm.
mm,
or there's something else going on here.
mm.
But that's when I started to think like, But again, there are different cultures on my campus, and there are different languages. People are just comfortable worshiping the way they worship. So I don't want to knock that, but at the same time, there was just something there. There's something else there.
So
no?
I have
Mhm.
a
Wait,
concluding.
let me talk about Clemson. We
Oh,
cannot pass
my
up
bad,
Clemson. Come on
my
now,
bad,
ring
my
on
bad.
and everything. Like, um,
Floor's yours.
I mean, I feel like, so I think it's interesting that you guys at UVA like learned a lot about the architecture because of the history of it. And I feel like Clemson is the only school in South Carolina that offers architecture, but I feel like we didn't talk about the buildings on campus enough because I didn't learn like, which particular buildings were built by slaves until like my third or fourth year, and the professor said it kind
Mhm.
of like in passing. It wasn't like a part of what we were learning that day. So I find it kind of like cool that you guys actually learned about who built it and all of that. I kind of feel like maybe that's by design too, because I kind of want to gloss over things at Clemson. I know while I was there, it's really big about Tillman. I think it's Tillman Hall, like changing the name of that because that was the last name of a master. I was like, not particularly interested in that because there are bigger issues, I think, particularly that we could have been focusing on. But I feel like it was a very strong Black community on campus. And I think that's one of the reasons why I chose to go there. Because of my experience kind of like going as a high school student and staying with another student. I originally was going to go as an engineering student, and they had a really good program for Black students in engineering, and they were very supportive of Black students. But then we get to the architecture program, it's like not that. And I feel like I don't want to say like the architecture program wasn't very diverse, but like Jamar remembers this when I got to UNC Charlotte. I had culture shock because I realized I had never really interacted with an Indian person until I got to UNC Charlotte. So it's like, yes, Clemson was diverse, but depending on the program you were in, you may not have interacted with certain cultures at all. Um, but very different from Perla's experience. I wouldn't say we're not religious, but like that was not the focus at Clemson at all. But I think it was really like big and strong in like the Black Greek life, which is kind of what led a lot of the culture on campus. And like anyone could be a part of that and experience it. You didn't need to be a part of that particular group to do that. So I appreciate that because that's where I found my sense of self and just kind of be able to breathe. It's like when you go to those parties and it's like, you know, these people are there to kind of protect you in a sense, or not even protect you, like they understand you.
Mm-hmm.
Because my sister and I had that when we were in high school with friends, but not, you know, around others. So
So that's actually
So
a
I have
good.
a quick question.
Go ahead.
Hopefully it's a quick one, but obviously just to you, Rob, X, and myself, we went to UVA. There is a historic place where Black people always gathered at UVA, and it was the Black
Black
bus
bus
stop.
stop.
It's one, and so UVA has a. I'm
Yeah, I
sorry.
was agreeing. The black bus stop.
Yeah. So and it's historical. Like it's been like since the
it's an
'70s or something.
actual
It's
bus
like it's a
stop.
historic
Yeah.
spot. So yeah, so the university has its own transit
Mm.
system, and there's one particular bus stop that Black people always gather at. It's always it's like right off outside the line, but it's always
Mm-hmm.
where people gather at. I'm sorry, students, more so students, not outsiders or anything like that.
It
But
was more so really to
did you
just
guys?
talk, hang out. Like nobody really caught the bus there. It was more like talk, catch up, high five, dap up the person you ain't seen all day. It was a communal thing.
Mm.
Yeah, it was like it was just something that you always saw somebody that you knew at that spot every time. Did you guys have something similar, like a Black space that was particularly Black at
Great
your
question.
campuses?
I'll go first because it's gonna be quick. um, y'all, architecture didn't allow me to have a social life. I don't know how to answer that question.
Definitely.
Like, I don't know how to answer that. I think there was a place like in the there's like there was a gathering, the gazebo maybe. I don't know. Actually, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I same. Like I was more focused on my academics. I was there for
Talk about
academics, my
it.
athletics.
I know my assignment.
So, if there was one, I would not be privy to that. But I would say it was probably one of the food halls. I lie. I do know it was one of
Mm,
the food halls, and it's where all the football players would be too. So I think that's kind of just like the natural gathering spot
yeah,
because, of course,
and
food.
it's and actually, I think the the gazebo is a food spot at
Mm.
my campus too. But
Y'all just
also,
hungry.
I went to a
Y'all just hungry.
sorry.
Y'all were just hungry.
Yeah. But the thing is, my school is so small. Well, compared to UVA, UNC, Clemson, like my school is small. When you guys say you have your own transit system, what? But anyway, um, it's so small, and we are a D3 school. So like there are things that and experiences that you guys have that I don't, which probably plays a role in me not even having enough to even answer with your question in regards to that. But yeah.
And what's interesting about the black bus stop is that I think a lot of what is celebrated about black culture is that I think as people we are performative. Like if you think about our experiences at church, it's a performative one. If you think about just the how we have the cultural exchange dialogue, like I remember Eddie Griffin had this real funny, who's a comedian, had this real funny joke about the difference between how white people say hello when you call their name and they're walking at the same time versus how black people do it. Like there's a swag to it, there's a performance to it. They can change directions and it's like a dance. And so there is a very particular performative experience that's a part of being black. And what's interesting about the Black Bus Stop is that I think it was really a way for us to perform out in front of our white counterparts. Center of grounds, right next to the amphitheater, a lot of activity and traffic. And so, I don't know about y'all, but when I knew that I was going to traverse through the Black Bus Stop, I made sure my fit was right. I made sure that my cut, because it was a performance of going to be seen and to see others, which is, I think, is a very interesting thing if you think about how we are intentional of crafting and making our spaces, um, and I think we're coming up on time, so maybe we jump into this question at another day. But I think as something to sort of pontificate on our way out is that if we think about the construction of identity and the spaces, like we're architects, like we deal in spaces all the time. So, um, you know, maybe at some point we pontificate on um, how us as architects in our architectural education and the training and the Corbusier and like all these architects that they put on a pedestal that we have to understand and dissect their work, all this Eurocentric style of creating and making it. It'd be interesting for us to get into like how did we process ourselves in that and see our identity and then think about what that means for black spaces. But I think that's for another time. This was a great conversation. I just really appreciated every one of y'all just telling your stories because we all have a story, and it all is a collective experience, but it's also very individualistic too. So thank y'all for sharing. Thank y'all for the transparency, and
You're welcome.
we'll catch you next time.
Bye.
Hey everybody! Thank you for listening to this episode of Autoblack. If you have enjoyed the discussion, please hit that subscribe button or follow button, whatever you'd like. Autoblack is a discussion-based podcast that is unapologetically black at the intersection of design and culture. We acknowledge that our experiences are just that, our experience, but your voice is worth elevating and your perspective is valid. So please join the conversation and connect with us on Instagram at autoblack_podcast or email us your thoughts, comments, and even future topics you'd like us to discuss on the stoop at autoblackpodcast@gmail.com. Autoblack out. Bye!